Even as my friends, we begin the first word in our reflection on it. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. We become aware that these 7 words are not the same in all the 4 Gospels. And therefore, we look at them in a way that combines all the 4 narratives. Each of the Gospel writers, the evangelists, are giving their own highlight about what they have understood of the mystery of the cross, which is important for us. This first word is very strange indeed. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Very gruesome. That Jesus is in the throes of his suffering. They are nailing him to the cross, and he utters a prayer to the Father to forgive them. Perhaps he has crossed the threshold. Otherwise, rationally, it is not understandable that he will ask the Father to forgive them. He has argued with the powers that be earlier in the Passion narrative. But now he realizes that the threshold has been crossed, and therefore the only way out is the way of love, the way of forgiveness. Who's the them that he's asking the Father to forgive? Firstly, the Romans, definitely, those who are nailing him to the cross. They were physically doing it, and therefore it's obvious. Jesus is asking the Father to forgive the soldiers. He's also asking the Father to forgive the Jews. They were responsible for what was happening. In fact, even Luke never presents the Roman soldiers as the only ones responsible. Christ even spoke to the daughters of Jerusalem on the way up to Calvary, and he said, "Weep not for me, but for yourselves." In other words, you're saying, you're allowed to blame for this, so weep for yourselves. All the same, he's asking the Father to forgive them as well. But the church has always made it a point to understand that it is not the Romans and the Jews who were responsible for the death of Jesus. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it says very clearly, the church holds Christians. Very strange. Christians will come only after the death of Jesus. The church holds Christians, not Jews, have the greatest responsibility for the torments of Jesus. So very often we have made Jews the culprits of this. Even films have gone that far. And that is why the church says very clearly, our crime is greater than that of the Jews. They did not know what they were exactly doing, but when we deny him by our deeds, we are in some way laying violent hands on Jesus. This is the understanding of the church. It's difficult for us to accept this, that Christians are primarily to be blamed for the death of Jesus, the sins of the Christians. And that is why St. Luke will take us into this whole issue of inadvertence. Do we know what we are doing, or we don't know what we are doing? Because there were those who have been told, the women of Jerusalem, they were told, but they probably did not grasp what was happening. And there are those who have not been told. The Roman soldiers were not told anything. Perhaps they were following instructions. Did they know what exactly they were doing? They didn't know that they were nailing the Son of God? Doubtful. But Jesus is asking them also to be forgiven, because he believes that everyone is party to this inadvertence. We do not know what is happening, but we are forgiven for that. But all the same, this word raises the benchmark of forgiveness very high. I don't know if we have grasped what Jesus is actually saying. Very often in my conversations at the Mount, when people of other faiths come, I begin a conversation about this. Just the other day, 2 young college students were asking me, tell me something about Jesus, people from other faiths. And trying to tell them in 2 minutes, I said, he asks us to forgive. They could not believe that forgiveness is possible. And that is ordinary forgiveness. But what Jesus is asking is, forgive the one who is nailing you. In other words, he's telling a woman who is being raped, forgive your rapist while the action is going on. It is that stark, because he's doing it himself. While he's being nailed, he's asking God to forgive. Probably we do not know what we are doing. And I think here, my dear brothers and sisters, we need to go a little deep into what Mother Teresa has told us. She says, when you are doing good to another, think that you are doing good to Jesus. I'd like to take a pun on it and say, if you are doing something wrong to somebody, understand you're doing wrong to Jesus. Mother Teresa did not say it, but I think it's in the same line of thought. The one you are interacting with represents Christ. So if you are washing the feet or healing the wounds of a wounded person, that is Christ. But if you are insulting somebody, hurting somebody and not forgiving somebody, whatever that person may be, is a person, is a child of God, someone in jail maybe, but he represents Christ to us. And therefore we are called to forgive. Pope Francis has admitted this inadvertence of his. I'd like to begin with that case of Father Carlos Mujica, who was a priest a Jesuit priest, as a provincial, very young person. Father Bergoglio was his name, Pope Francis now. He became a provincial in 1973, in a period of the Argentinian history which was very difficult. Lots of violence, oppression by the government. And there were certain Jesuit priests who were working with the poor, living in the slums too. And Father Bergoglio at that time would not understand the need to do it. So along with the church, he was coming down and clamping on these priests who were working with the poor. Father Carlos Mujica was killed right in front of his church while he was talking to a young couple preparing for their marriage. So that became an argument for Father Bergoglio to say, see, this need not be done, should not be done. And therefore he gave this as an example for coming mainstream, as he would say. Do not go too close to those who are oppressed, in other words. It was only later that he would realize what he did. But what is most touching is that 3 years before he became a pope, he gave an interview to some journalists. I'd like to read to you what he said, because it gives us an example of the inadvertence. So very often we do not know what we are doing. He says, I don't want to mislead anyone. The truth is that I am a sinner who God in His mercy has chosen to love in a privileged manner. He has encapsulated this in his motto, Miserando atque eligendo. Merciful and yet elected. From a young age, life pushed me into leadership roles. As soon as I was ordained a priest, I was designated as the master of novices, and 2.5 years later, leader of the province. And I had to learn from my errors along the way, the Pope says. Because to tell you the truth, I have made hundreds of errors. It would be wrong for me to say that these days I ask forgiveness for the sins and offenses that I might have committed. Today, I asked for forgiveness for the sins and offenses that I did indeed commit. Let us pray that we might come under the banner of this inadvertence, acknowledge we have made mistakes, perhaps not knowing, and so make us worthy of the promises of Jesus to forgive us.